Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Friday, December 30th, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. The biggest game in Kansas State football history? A case could be made that it's happening on Saturday in New Orleans when the Wildcats take on Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. It's not a college football playoff game, but it's the best matchup outside the playoffs. Kansas State is the Big 12 champion. Alabama is, well, Alabama. Beat writer Kellis Robinette breaks down the game and shares the biggest storylines of the contest that will begin at 11 a.m. on Saturday. The game's on ESPN. Okay, let's get started talking K-State, Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. Kellis, we're one day away from a huge Kansas State football game, but is it the biggest Kansas State football game in history? I know you asked that question to on your Q&A earlier this week, or was it late last week? I can't remember. But what were the responses? What is the Sugar Bowl game against Alabama on Saturday at 11 a.m. the biggest game in Kansas State football history?
Well, I think you can make an argument for it. Nobody really shot me down by suggesting that it would be. Somebody even replied and said he thought it was not only the biggest game in Kansas State history, the biggest sporting event in Kansas State history, period, which I don't know if I'd go that far. It's a team that's played in the national championship for basketball. There's bragging rights and everything in this game, a trophy, but there's no real huge stakes. The loser's not going to go home weeping about it. So I don't know that I'd go quite that far. The more I think about it, maybe I'd say, like the Big 12 championship game in 98, I think that maybe was a little bigger, again, because of the stakes. But when you look at it from a distance, it's hard to say this isn't. It's the Sugar Bowl, one of the most historic bowl games in all the land. Kansas State's never played in it before. They haven't played in a major bowl game in a decade. And the opponent is one that they've never played before either. And it's the opponent you want to play in college football, Alabama. I mean, you beat Bama, you put it on a shirt, you wear that thing forever, and you don't get that in a lot of bowl games. So I don't know if it's the biggest game ever, but it's up there, top 5 for sure.
Yeah, you might not even wear that shirt. You might frame it and hang it in the in the man cave or something.
Yeah, or just get a tattoo. Instead of a winning shirt, you go right across the street and tattoo it on your body.
There you go.
Sugar Bowl champs.
Absolutely. Okay. It is, like I said, 11 a.m. on Saturday. My quick thought on this is Kansas State has played in some huge games in its history, the Bill Snyder era forward, but they never had a month to think about it, right? It was always a week in advance for a game or a big regular season game developed over the course of the season. This has been an opportunity for Kansas State fans to think and dream and hope and everything. Hey, so, it's been a crazy week for people trying to move around the country, and so many people have been trying to get from this part of the country to where you are right now in New Orleans. Have you heard about any kind of horror stories of people who had their Southwest airline game plan or travel plans disrupted, or has that become a thing this week?
Yeah, a few. Fortunately, the people who were trying to get out here super early were us media types who aren't all that important. So it was an inconvenience for me. I tried to fly out of Kansas City on a Southwest flight on the 26th. And failed miserably. Had three flights canceled on me without even leaving the house. So if there was a silver lining to it, I never even had to leave home and just rebooked out of Manhattan. So it was pretty painless actually. So no real big horror story for me. But yes, I've heard of some people who were trying to come down on the 28th. And there's just nothing available because every Southwest canceled everything. But I think most fans have gotten crafty. If they were flying out of Kansas City, now they're flying out of Wichita. If they were flying Southwest, now they're flying American. Delta, I think, before this game came through clutch and added some direct flights from Wichita to New Orleans specifically for this game. So, Kansas State fans, they know how to get to bowl games. And if push comes to shove, they're just getting in their car and driving down here. So it doesn't seem, I'm sure there are horror stories. I'm sure there are people who, had to say, shoot, I can't go, but it does not look like here. I was down on Bourbon Street last night, and there was a lot more purple than crimson out and about. So they've made the trip. They're going to show up.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. I haven't seen on social media anybody offering their Sugar Bowl tickets, to somebody who can be there. People who got them are going to use them, and that is just the Kansas State way, no doubt about it. Okay, let's talk about some of the issues that and stories that you've written about this week. Some really good stuff. I really enjoyed the story about Ben Sinnott. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. But the tight end who not only has had a terrific season for the Wildcats, but he's helped lift everyone's game. I like that thought that you wrote about. How did a guy with 28 receptions for about 400 yards and 4 touchdowns help the entire offense?
Well, for starters, he came pretty much out of nowhere. A walk-on from Iowa, grew up in the same small town as Chris Kleiman. It's really the only reason that he recruited him. I say only reason, he's a good football player too, but he was committed to South Dakota. That's where he was going to go play. Chris Kleiman said, nah, if there's a decent football player from my hometown, he's going to be playing for me at Kansas State. Convinced him to walk on here, and he went from like a skinny tall kid to now a beefy tall kid who can get out and catch passes and stuff. And I think he took everybody by surprise in the Oklahoma game. Pretty much Kansas State's whole offense in that game was either Adrian Martinez scrambling, or he would drop back and just look across the seam and see Ben streaking wide open for like 100 receiving yards. And everybody kind of wrote that off as a fluke. Oklahoma just didn't defend him. That there's no way he'll keep doing that, but he did. A few games later, he's catching 7 passes, then he's catching 2 touchdowns, and the more and more he did it, it was just kind of funny to see as the season went on. He went from a guy that defenses ignored to now they're keying on him, and all of a sudden, when Kansas State's a team that loves to run 4 vertical routes a lot in passing games because it opens up some things for the quarterback to run if he wants to, and you either have to choose, do you defend the crossing guy, who a lot of times is the tight end, or do you put your attention on the receivers going downfield? Well, now when they run that play, you got all this attention on the tight end. The safety's coming down to stop him instead of Malik Knowles or Phillip Brooks, who are going downfield. And I think that's a big reason why those guys have had such great seasons as receivers. And I think it's opened a lot of things for Deuce Vaughn too, because right at about the time when Ben started playing his best football is also the same time when Deuce Vaughn started catching passes left and right. And it's really hard in an offense when you have to account for the receivers, the QB run game, the tight end, and wheel routes and stuff with the running back coming out of the backfield. And I think that's why he's made such a big difference to the offense, because now in the past when teams would say, all right, we got to stop Deuce Vaughn, now you're saying now we got to stop the tight end too. You can't stop everything, and Kansas State's done a very good job of finding the open man whenever they do deploy him as a receiver.
I know this is a local perspective, but I always think that when teams discover tight ends, there's a Chiefs influence on that because of just how effective the Chiefs have used Travis Kelce, and before him, Tony Gonzalez over the years. They really weaponized that position. And look, the Chiefs aren't the only ones to have ever done it, but whenever I see teams go to it and it opens things up the way it has for the Wildcats, I always think of what the Chiefs have done with that. And nobody in football has done it better than the Chiefs over the last few years. Another good story that I really opened my eyes was the idea of this really good Kansas State offensive line maybe back intact for next season. There's at least one NFL prospect on this offensive line, maybe multiple, but they all have decisions to make. And there is a thought that if they may work in tandem on this, which would be an incredible first recruiting job victory for next year. Well, it wouldn't be the first, but a major recruiting victory if this offensive line came back intact.
Yeah, I mean, Kansas State, think about this over the years when they've been their best, other than this season, it's usually been because they have a experienced offensive line. And they've had seasons before when they've returned all 5 starters. They did it under Bill Snyder a few times, and those were some really good seasons for the Cats. And to think that they could do it again next season is kind of scary because the offensive line played really well this season. They've got the Big 12 Offensive Lineman of the Year in Cooper Beebe at left guard, who's just great. I think based on kind of body language and the way he's answered questions this week, I do think he's coming back next season.
Wow.
Things could always change after the bowl game. Maybe impresses somebody and they say, hey, you're going to be like a second round pick. You got to go. But I would say right now, I think he's leaning toward coming back, playing with his little brother who's going to be on campus. And his comment yesterday was, if one of us decides to come back, we're all coming back. So if he comes back, I think it'll be a no-brainer for guys like Christian Duffy, Hayden Gillum, KT Leviston to all come back. And the thing that is really cool about that is those might not even be the best 5 offensive linemen on the team next year because you got Taylor Portier, who's been injured, just awful injury luck. He's one of their best linemen when he's healthy. If he comes back healthy, he could help out. And they've got a really good tackle who's younger, who's coming up, Andrew Linegang. They like him a lot. He's so good that they found some ways to, use him as a tight end. There's an extra blocker at times this season just because they think he's that valuable. So to think not only that you have 5 offensive linemen coming back, but 2 other really good plug and play guys that you can insert at any time. It's kind of scary to think about. So even if you lose a guy like Deuce Vaughn and you have to go to a new running back next season, well, it's going to be a whole lot easier if you're right up behind an established offensive line.
I can remember you and I talking to Taylor Portier at the Catbackers function in Kansas City. I think it was in Lenexa, actually, over this past summer. Seemed like a really good guy. And the theme of that conversation was overcoming an injury. He'd only played if I remember this right, only a handful of games previous year. And then lo and behold, he just you're right, just terrible injury luck for him. What about a theme throughout the bowl season so far has been who's playing, who's not playing, who's opting out, who's in the transfer portal, who's got NFL draft potential that doesn't want to play. In the Sugar Bowl, the story in this game has been the Alabama players who decided to play, Bryce Young and Will Anderson especially, but I mean, it was never an issue for Kansas State, was there, with anybody who would not be playing for Kansas State that would have played in the Big 12 championship game?
Yeah, I mean, you could have made a case that Felix and DK Uzama could have sat out. You could have made a case that Deuce Vaughn could sit out. You could have made a case that Cooper Beebe could sit out. But Chris Kleiman actually mentioned in his final press conference earlier today, there was no discussions. He didn't have to ask anybody. Nobody had to talk to him about it. It was just understood. Like you came to Kansas State to play in games like this. You were not opting out of the Sugar Bowl. Come on. what are what are you doing here if you're even asking about that? So it is interesting that it was such a given that Kansas State players were going to play, and it's like this big surprise that Alabama players want to. Though I will say Felix had a pretty good line yesterday. Somebody I think he got tired of being asked about the Alabama opt-ins, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah.
He had some remark about I bet they're surprised I'm playing. So it's an interesting way to look at things. But if you're going to be a surefire draft pick, why play in this game? I get that argument, but at the same time, if you love football, you might as well go do it. Nick Saban has said he's made taken some special precautions this season to make it as safe as possible for his guys to play. I don't know if that means less practice, less good on good practice, no tackling, or if when they get in this game they're not going to have Bryce Young running. Which is an interesting strategy element of things. But I'm happy they're playing. It makes the game a whole lot more interesting. And I do kind of miss the days of 5-10 years ago when you go into a bowl and everybody just automatically wanted to play it.
Yeah. Yep. those days are gone, lost and gone forever. But hey, that's where we are, and
maybe an expanded playoff will change that.
That to me is going to be the absolute fascinating question. Because now
it'll make bowls much even more meaningless.
Yep.
But the playoff games will be amazing.
Right, but then you're asking a college kid with pro potential to play an additional 3 games, not just you will have played your your regular season, your conference championship game. So now you're up to 13 games, and then possibly 3 more if you're a top seeded team that gets to the championship. And so that's a heavy load. On the other side, one of the arguments against that heavy workload was kids aren't getting paid to go to college. Well, now they're not only getting paid, some of these programs are getting paid pretty handsomely, and so that at least that factor is off the table for these guys. But we'll see. We'll see how it works. Another frontier on the horizon for college football. Hey, this is Blair. There are several ways to access the Star Sports section. Let me tell you about a couple of them. There is Sports Pass. For $12.99 a month, you get unlimited digital access to all of the Star Sports content, including beat writing, columns, features, pretty much everything we write. The deal renews monthly until you tell us to cancel. For $159.99 a year, you get everything the Star has to offer digitally, including sports and the e-edition. Go to kansascity.com and drop down to the bottom of the page where it says Start a Subscription for more information. Your support has never been more important. As always, thanks for reading and listening. We got to touch on this because we talked about it the last time we talked in anticipation of a big K-State game, which was the Big 12 title game against TCU, and that was, could Kansas State use Adrian Martinez in the game somehow, some way? Will Howard is the unequivocal starter, will get the majority of snaps, but Adrian Martinez is a month healthier, right, than he was going into Big 12. And I just have a feeling that he is going to find the field some way.
Yeah, and that to me is one of the most interesting aspects of this game is how and when do they deploy Adrian Martinez. I think they will. I think you'll see him out there in some capacity. I just don't really know what it is. There are a lot of things you could do. You could use him in a wildcat package. You could use him in a short yardage situation at the goal line. You could give him, 1 or 2 series all to himself and just kind of have a true 2 quarterback system. I don't know. You could have him in there in trick plays. Will Howard throws to Adrian. Adrian throws back to him. K-State special. There's a lot of things that they could do here that could throw Alabama off. And I'm really interested to see how they do it because I'm torn on how much you want to use him just because Will Howard has been so good. Taking him off the field doesn't seem like the best strategy in my mind. But, Adrian didn't have to come play here. And he won some big games for Kansas State early in the season. I think the coaches probably feel like they owe it to him to get him out there. He's never played in a bowl game before. They want him to go out with a bang. So I think we'll see him in some fashion. I just really can't tell you what it'll be. Yeah.
I'd like to see him make a big play. It would just be kind of cool to not just get on the field, but contribute to a touchdown, just do something that will make his college career that much more memorable. So, all right. I think we got to ask you, well, let me cover this first. Big 12 in the postseason so far.
Awful.
L, and one little W. I shouldn't say little. Nice win for Texas Tech over Ole Miss, but Baylor, Kansas, Oklahoma State, Texas, and OU all going down in bowl games. When I saw the bowl lineup, I thought it would be a tough year for the Big 12 in terms of matchups, and I think they were only favored in 2 games. And, of course, Kansas State not favored against Alabama. The line jumped, actually, in Alabama's favor when it was determined that that Bryce Young and Will Anderson would play. So what's going on with the Big 12 here? Is it just a matchup issue so far?
Well, for starters, I'll say that one of the sports books had an interesting bet you could make coming into bowl season. It was over under win totals for each conference. I'd never seen that before, but
Interesting.
yeah, you could bet over under wins for the Big 12, and the Big 12 number was 3.5. And my inclination was they would go under, but I didn't make the bet because I didn't want to make that bet. I'm a Big 12 guy. I don't want to be sitting here rooting against the teams I watch every week. It's kind of like when I see the Chiefs versus Houston. I'm pretty sure Houston can cover a 17-point spread. I'm like, I don't want to be betting against the Chiefs here, so I just left that alone. But the thing that's hard for them is that I do think it's a matchup thing. I think it's a motivation thing. Like Baylor just got an awful draw. They have to play Air Force, prepare for a triple option without all that much prep time. They have to do it in the cold, in one of the coldest. I think this is the coldest bowl game on record in like the last 25 years. They had footage of like the band, people played the trombone, and it was so cold, their instruments got frozen when they were trying to go out. Just an awful game, awful matchup for them. Texas against Washington. I mean, Texas with Bijan Robinson wasn't even all that good this season. They go into a game without him. You can't really expect them to beat Washington. So those two right there, I think you can write off. But the other games I think were fair. I mean, like Kansas, Arkansas. The Jayhawks had every opportunity to win that game. They just couldn't do it. Texas Tech beat Ole Miss. And then we'll see. I think the Big 12 can still redeem themselves here, because if Kansas State wins, especially if TCU wins, people aren't going to remember that Baylor and Kansas lost these games. But it has not been a great bowl season for the Big 12. And Oklahoma actually put up one of the better performances, even though they lost last night.
Right, to Florida State, but the Sooners' loss makes them 6-7, and they're under 500 for the first time since I think 98 or something like that, pre Bob Stoops. So that's how bad it's been. And you're absolutely right. The perception of the Big 12 will absolutely change if they win their next two, and especially if they win their next three. But if they win their next two, which would be Kansas State over Alabama and then TCU over Michigan, that would send the Horned Frogs into the national championship game against either Georgia or Ohio State. It will have been a banner year for the Big 12. So
let me ask you this: do you make any grand statements on conferences based on their bowl performances? What's your take on that?
When they do well. Yeah, you crow a lot if they were 7-1 or something. And the Big 12 have had some good bowl years. Last year, I think, was in the couple of years ago. The COVID Bowl year, I remember that was when Iowa State beat Oregon, I think, in the Fiesta Bowl. Big 12 had a really good run. So, and it's all about the matchups. And as we were talking about earlier, the opt-outs have a big, play a big role in these things now. So, yeah, but I do think that there are three ways to measure. There are two ways to measure a conference, and that's non-conference games in in the regular season and bowl games, and so those count toward the perception. The other place is the NFL draft. How many players from your conference are taken and in what rounds, that sort of thing, and that's why the SEC can be under 500 in bowl games, but when they have twice as many players taken in the draft as the next conference. There's no doubt that it is the best conference. And even in this game, Alabama is going to end up with more players drafted from this team than Kansas State will. But there are some factors I think that favor K-State in this game, and emotional factors, the month to prepare factor that I think helps the Wildcats here, the approach to the game. I wouldn't be surprised if I think the outcome that would surprise me most in this game is if Alabama won big. Kansas State has, they had the loss to Tulane, which is also in the, playoff bowl and a bowl game, not playoff, but New Year's Six type bowl. And the other losses, are explainable, but Kansas State just is an excellent team. I think they'll play a good game unless they turn it over 4 or 5 times. I would probably pick Alabama to win, but I think Kansas State keeps this thing close. It's a fourth quarter game, and they will be their enthusiasm level, I think, is going to be higher than Alabama's, and that's what should keep the game compelling to me. How do you see it playing out?
I would agree with that. I think the odds makers really sum this game up as well as anybody. Kansas State fans come in saying, there's this huge underdog. Nobody expects us to win. Well, that's true. They are 6.5 point underdogs here. I think it's interesting that is by far the lowest point spread Alabama's had all season. They were favored in every single game. They're favored all the time, unless they play Georgia, like at Georgia. They're favored every other time. But in their 12 regular season games this year, they were favored by at least 9 in all 12 of them. And even when they were going to Tennessee, when Tennessee was undefeated, it was their game of the century. Alabama was still -9. Kansas State here, neutral field, with all those things you just said, fired up, motivational advantage. They're only 6.5 point dogs here. So people are giving Kansas State a lot of respect in this matchup. And I could see it going a few ways. I could see Kansas State winning. I think they've got a shot to win outright. But I think it's more likely just because of the talent discrepancy that Alabama does find a way to win. I think it's going to be hard for Kansas State to move the ball like they do in the Big 12 against this defense. And the thing I kind of keep going back to is the one type of team Kansas State has struggled with over the years is just teams that line up and have all these 5-star guys who, when push comes to shove, they're just a little bit better. They haven't beaten Texas in 6 tries. And that to me always just seems to be the reason why they've just got a few advantages, on the roster that Kansas State just doesn't right now. So that's going to be the hard thing for them is can they stand up to just wave after wave of Alabama talent? I think they could if they have some explosives. If Deuce Vaughn gets out and has like 2 or 3 touchdowns in this game, then yeah, they could absolutely win. I could see Alabama winning by like 14 too, though. So it's a tough one to handicap, but I'm with you. The most surprising thing would be if just Alabama comes out and rolls. I don't see a blowout here. Yeah,
and that hasn't been – and even though, under Saban and historically, I guess, that's, a big Alabama victories are common. That hasn't been the case with this year's Alabama team. They've won a couple of games by large margins, but for the most part, they haven't. When they played the good competition, in addition to the 2 losses, which, by the way, were coin flip games, the loss at Tennessee and the loss at LSU, but they didn't, against Ole Miss, that was a 6-point game, and I'm trying to think of what their other good victories are this year. They did beat Mississippi State pretty good, but it just seems them away from home, especially this season, has been a mixed bag. Like they almost lost Texas. Probably should have lost to Texas. Yeah, the quarterback would have stayed healthy. They only won that game by 1. I guess they beat Arkansas pretty good. They somehow only beat Texas A&M by 4. I don't think A&M even had their quarterback in that game. Lost at Tennessee. I guess they took care of Auburn, but it's not a vintage, Nick Saban team. They're better than most teams out there, but they're not lining up and just murdering people. So that again is to me why it would be surprising if they won this game by 30 or something. Okay. All right, Kellis. Appreciate you taking time on. I will say one more. More thing. I think this Kansas State roster is better equipped to handle a game like this than we've seen in the recent past. Like Bill Snyder, during the end of his tenure, just had an awful record in bowl games. It's very hard for him, especially when they got to this stage, when it would be a Cotton Bowl versus Arkansas or a Fiesta Bowl against Oregon. You could just see the talent discrepancy. It was just too much for them. They had these great seasons where they overachieved, won all these big games, but then when they got a neutral field against a power, they just couldn't stand up to them. I don't think that's the case here. I think Kansas State has enough talent to go out there and play with Alabama and possibly win. So it should be a good game. And I'm tired of talking about it. I just want to see it at this point. Right. It's time to play. And hey, thankfully for you, it's first game out of the box tomorrow on Saturday, and you don't have to wait until 8:00 or something to cover this game. So you'll get to cover it and then pay attention to the college football semifinal games that are going to be going on after. It's like the first of a triple header for ESPN. And they put it on as the lead-in to the college football playoff games. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. All right, Kellis, that's great. And when you come back, you got a good basketball team to cover, at least the basketball team off to a good start. So Good times at Kansas State, that's for sure. All right, buddy. Take care. Have fun.
All right. Thanks, Larry.
That'll do it for today, this week, and for 2022 on SportsBeat KC. It's been another terrific year. We're 3.5 years old as a daily enterprise, and we look forward to joining you again in 2023. It happens because of a terrific production staff. Randy Mason put together today's show. George Howard, Monty Davis, Jeff Rosen, and Scott Chasen are all valued members of the production lineup. Tip of the cap to Kellis Robinette for sharing his insights on Kansas State. Find his stuff in the print editions of the Kansas City Star, the Wichita Eagle, and the Star's Morning Sports Edition. It's full of local and national sports news, features, scores, everything. It's the best digital sports page in the country. Check it out at liveedition.kansascity.com. A sincere thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City every day and every year.